G'day everybody. So we'll start today with some meditation. We sit either on the floor, with our legs crossed with the knees resting on the ground, or we sit in a chair. The most conducive posture for developing deep concentration is to sit in the Vajra position, which is the posture that's, if you look at the Buddha statues, you'll see the Buddha sitting in what sometimes we call full lotus, crossed legs. That's the Vajra position. However, we're trainees. We wish to develop deep concentration, but we've got a fair way to go before being able to do that. So whether or not we can sit in the Vajra position really is not all that important. Most important is that we sit with a straight back, straight but comfortable. Our hands rest in our lap with the right hand on top of the left. The thumbs touching gently, meeting gently like this. Elbows held away from the sides of the body. Our head is inclined forward somewhat, not too far forward because then it's easy to fall asleep. Not completely upright because then it's easier to develop agitation. But tilted forward somewhat so that if the eyes were looking ahead, they'd be directed at a point about 1 meter in front of the knees. Our mouth rests shut in a natural position, with the tongue resting against the front upper palate. And we breathe through the nose. First of all, we practice mindfulness of the body, in particular, checking our face, our neck, our shoulders, that we're not subconsciously tightening any muscles, that they're relaxed and settled. So normally, habitually, our attention is drawn to the objects of the 5 senses, sights, sounds, and so forth. When we're practicing meditation, we withdraw our attention away from these objects. And we focus our complete attention on a single object to the exclusion of anything else, any other thoughts. And the object we choose is the breath. So without trying to control or regulate the breathing normally, we observe the breath. And it's not our normal way of focusing in that one part of the mind is aware of the breath and the other part, and the rest of the mind is of following different thoughts and ideas. What we're trying to achieve is that all of our attention, to the exclusion of all other thought, is on the breath. As you breathe in, observe, now I'm breathing in. As you breathe out, observe, now I'm breathing out. A measure of our concentration or meditation is to count the cycle of the in and out breath. So with each in-breath, we increase the count by 1. But what we're trying to do here is to reach 21 cycles of in and out breath without becoming distracted. And if we do become distracted, if part of our mind wanders off onto something else, then we reset the count. So we'll do that for a few moments, aiming to be able to focus for 21 cycles of in and out breath. Remember, observe the sensation of the breath passing through the nostrils and count the cycles of in and out breath, aiming to achieve 21 without becoming the least bit distracted, without losing the object. Okay, so we can use this technique of counting the cycles of in and out breath as a way of measuring how we're going. To begin with, I think it's pretty common that people will find it hard to hold the concentration without significant distraction for more than 2, 3, or 4 breaths. But as our practice progresses, as we become more consistent, as we practice consistently, then we'll notice, we'll definitely notice progress, improvement. It's not a linear thing. It depends. Some days will be better than others, but on average, definitely there will be. We will improve if we're practicing properly. But also it depends on circumstances. So, for example, if we've had a really sort of difficult day with maybe with an argument with somebody, and then at the end of the day we go to sit down to meditate, then we'll find that it's easy to continue to replay the argument and hard to concentrate on the object. So on the other hand, if we've had a pleasant, relaxing day, then it might be easier. With our meditation, we should set aside a particular time of the day for meditation every day. For some people, morning is more convenient and better. For other people, afternoon is better. Generally speaking, it's said that morning is ideal because our mind and body are rested in the morning. So it should be a particular time of the day to meditate, and then we have a particular place in where we live to meditate. We should be, for our session, we should, I think, be by ourselves, so we're not distracted by things going on around us. And then we should meditate at least for 10 minutes. And then as we get sort of more used to the practice, then we can increase that to 15 or 20 minutes. There's no need to push. We should do whatever we're comfortable with. But nonetheless, it's good to have at the beginning of the session the intention, now I'm going to meditate for 15 minutes, even if it is difficult. And then we keep on trying for 15 minutes. I remember many years ago when I was working in Tasmania, I was living I was sharing a room with 6 other people. We would go out doing geophysical exploration during the day, but we had a single room with 7 guys, 7 beds. And so I used to wake up a little bit earlier than everybody else, and I would sit up in my bed and meditate. That was back in the late 70s. So yeah, so it's good to have a nice, clean, quiet environment, and then we can sort of have our routine, clean ourselves, tidy up our room, and then sit down to meditate. So during these classes, you'll see that I'll often draw a comparison between meditation and physical exercise. So let's say we have a goal with our physical exercise. We want to train to be able to run a half marathon and then ultimately a full marathon. But at the moment, we're complete beginners. then at the beginning to jog even 500 meters is very hard because we have no condition to be able to run. But then if we run every day or every second day, we'll start to improve. So a marathon, what's a marathon? 42 kilometers or something like that. So in the beginning, when we have no condition, to be able to run a marathon just seems like a ridiculously hard goal. It's the difference between ourselves and those who can run a marathon is vast. But if we keep on trying consistently and practice properly, train properly, then over time, then our ability to run improves. We train our body, the muscles develop condition, we might lose weight. Our breathing, our breathing and our heart condition improves, and we get better and better. So jogging is an example of training the body. Meditation is a method for training the mind. So until we discover practices like meditation, we probably haven't encountered this idea of having the objective of training the mind. When we start meditating, to begin with, the first holding the object for 10 or 15 minutes is difficult. Even sitting still, so many thoughts going on. We want to get up or leave our chair, which really maybe quite challenging to be able to sit still for 10 or 15 minutes. But as we become more comfortable and familiar, it becomes better, becomes easier. And then we might naturally decide we want to increase our meditation sessions to 20 minutes or half an hour once a day, and then twice a day. And then we might increase our morning meditation to an hour or an hour and a half each morning or whatever as we improve. So whilst this series of talks is not, its focus is not, sorry, I said series and my phone heard Siri, so pardon the noises in the background. So yes, whilst the objective of these talks, this class, they're not intended for Buddhist people or for people who are to become Buddhist or have any wish to become Buddhist. And in fact, as I mentioned last week, there's no reason or need to change our system of belief. If we're Hindu or Muslim or Christian, then we should keep maintain that belief system. But nonetheless, in the talking about Buddhism specifically, the main Buddhist practice is meditation, and the Buddhist path is to go from being a beginner to achieving complete enlightenment, Buddhahood. And the way that enlightenment is achieved is through the practice of meditation. So common it became common in Tibet, and now it's becoming more common for practitioners to do extended meditation retreats. And in the Tibetan system, there's the concept of a 3-year retreat, where basically the person dedicates the entire 3 years solely to the practice of meditation. They don't leave the retreat for those 3 years, and they would do 4 meditation sessions a day, and each one probably be 2 to 3 hours each session. And as I said, it's common amongst Tibetans. Also now, many Westerners are doing long retreats, even 3-year retreats. And what they say is that at the beginning, the retreat it's harder, but then as they settle into the retreat, then they think what they really want to do is to continue to do retreats, so it becomes easier and easier. So we find it difficult to hold our concentration on the object for 3, 4, 5, let alone 21 breaths. An accomplished meditator can hold a complex, visualized object effortlessly, in complete clarity and perfect detail, without the slightest distraction for several hours. So, as I was saying, it could be a complex visualization. So you might say, that's ridiculous. How is that possible? But going back to the analogy of physical exercise, when we start running, the prospect of being able to run a marathon without stopping, 42, 43 kilometers, seems completely out of reach. But through familiarity, through skillful and correct training, we get better and better. Continuing the example, not everybody who goes running, who goes jogging, has as their goal meditation, has as their goal being able to run a marathon. Their goal might be to be able to get a bit fitter, to lose a bit of weight, to become a bit healthier, to have more stamina. So like that with meditation, not everybody with their meditation practice has the goal of becoming a fully enlightened being, a Buddha, or of achieving nirvana, liberation, or even of achieving really, really deep concentration. But nonetheless, they want to use meditation to train their mind, perhaps to develop greater stillness, clarity, relaxation, and concentration. So we can use the meditation technique to achieve a variety of goals, but all of these, what they all have in common, regardless of what our objective of meditation, is to train the mind. To train the mind to be quieter, still, and concentrated. And we ask, well, why? So if we're going to undergo any training, in this case, training of the mind, we do that with a reason or with a purpose, perhaps even with a goal. So from the Buddhist perspective, and it's not just for Buddhists, but the point is that the reason for training the mind is to cultivate, develop happiness, and to reduce unhappiness and suffering. So every living being wants happiness, and no one wants unhappiness or suffering. Commonly, perhaps most of our lives, our way of gaining or achieving this goal is through engaging with the objects principally with the objects of the 5 physical senses. So objects of sight, of sound, taste, smell, and touch. So when we encounter an object of the physical senses, we try to have encounters with more and more with objects that we like, and to have less and less encounter with things that we dislike. We seek happiness through entertainment, such as watching a movie, listening to music, or spending time with friends, people whose company we enjoy. But in all of those cases, the way that we engage or relate with these is through the 5 physical senses. And we, because we have the assumption that the way to have happiness is to have more and more of what we enjoy, and the way to be free of unhappiness is to have fewer and fewer encounters with the things that we don't like, that we dislike. We strive very, very hard to have more and more material comfort, more and more material possessions, so that we can have whatever we have, whatever we like, and we can be free of difficult circumstances such as not having that discomfort from being hungry or thirsty, or having to exhaust ourselves just to live, even just to survive. But there's no denying that material comfort can be helpful to a degree in gaining happiness. But what we tend to do is, what happens is, by pursuing these material goals, more and more wealth, more and more relationships, a better house, a better career, a better partner, a better car, better holiday, better computer, better TV, better internet connection, better food, so on and so forth. Even the very process of striving to have more and more, better and better, that is necessarily an uncomfortable and unhappy attitude, because the implication of wanting more and more is that whatever we do have is not sufficient. And therefore, by thinking that what we have is not sufficient, we're discontented. Also, through thinking that more and more is a way of making us happier and happier, when we see people who are, or encounter people who are better off than we, this also causes us unhappiness. We have envy or jealousy. Also, through wanting more and more, if we encounter circumstances or people that hinder us, impede us in achieving our goals, that makes us unhappy, and we develop dislikes, animosities to those things that are preventing us from achieving our goal of more and more. And the thing with striving continuously for more and more is that we make ourselves miserable through jealousy and competition. We have fatigue, stress, anxiety, and even when we do have even if we're lucky to have abundant riches, then we have worry about how we're going to maintain that wealth, how we're going to prevent it from being lost. We have anxiety about the share market going up and down. We have anxiety about property prices going up and down. We have anxiety that our investments aren't producing the yield that we hoped of them. So this whole way of living, way of thinking, where our happiness, where we are absolutely certain that our happiness is dependent on having more and more, or better and better, this thinking like this necessarily only produces unhappiness. I'm not saying that having more is a cause of unhappiness, but what I'm saying is having the attitude where thinking that happiness is dependent on having more and better, that particular attitude, that particular way of living our lives brings unhappiness by its very nature. Our mind is never content, never relaxed, and there's always something that causes us to be discontented and unsettled. So I talked about the 5 physical senses. There's a sixth sense, which is called the sixth sense is mental sense or mental factor or mind. So in terms of the physical, mind in Buddhism is defined as being clear and aware. So aware means being aware of experiences. We encounter objects of sight through through the eye organ or through the sense of eye sense, but we become aware of what we've encountered through mind. As I was saying before, if we're very distracted, or last week, if we're very distracted, or if we're unconscious or in deep sleep, then although there might be sounds occurring, if the mind is not active, then it's not aware of them. So the first of the two characteristics of mind is aware of things, and we'll hopefully it'll become clearer what is meant by being aware during this series. The other characteristic of mind is it is by nature clear. And that means that there is nothing within the mind that necessarily obscures it or causes it not to clearly perceive its object. I'll talk more about that later on. So with this an example of how this awareness operates is that, let's say we perceive something delicious, a beautiful cake or a yummy biscuit. So when we see it, we have an awareness that looks like a beautiful piece of cake. We have first of all, we see the sight, the color and shape of it. It says that is cake. So through eye sense, we observe the object. Through mental sense, we recognize the object as being cake. And then through mind, through seeing beautiful cake, it generates a positive feeling. Through perceiving a horrible piece of cake, which is stale and old and moldy, it would produce a negative feeling. That is not so. A positive feeling is a feeling that is pleasant. A negative feeling is that is unpleasant. So this response in terms of a feeling, a positive feeling or a negative feeling, in dependence on observing a piece of cake, that feeling is necessarily mind. Necessarily mind. It's nothing other than mind. That feeling of pleasant or unpleasant is not produced by the cake. It is stimulated or triggered independent on perceiving or looking at, not to mention tasting and swallowing the cake. So you might say, well, of course it's produced by cake. If I see a nice cake, it makes me happy. If I eat a nice cake, it makes me happy. If I eat a horrible stale piece of cake, it makes me unhappy and ill. But two people can eat the same piece of cake. One person can think this cake is delicious. Another person can think this cake is too sweet. It's got too much sugar. it's got strawberries in it, and I hate strawberries. So the same piece of cake, when experienced by two different people, when tasted by two different people, produces different results depending on each of those people. So this shows that whether we perceive something as pleasant or unpleasant isn't dependent on the perceived object, but it depends on how we respond to that object. And our response of pleasant or unpleasant is a mental response, is the mind responding in one way or another. Similarly with music, what one person considers to be pleasant, enjoyable music, another person thinks is, let's say it's chamber music. For one person, chamber music is fascinating and relaxing and delightful. For another person, it's boring, or opera, or whatever is the current popular music style of music. For one person, it's really, really enjoyable and absorbing. For another person, it's just annoying, too loud, too much thumping. Same music, experienced by innocent faculties of two people, which are basically the same, different responses depending on mind. So depending on our response to something, in terms of the feeling that it generates, we then have a reaction. If we see the cake and we taste a piece of cake and it's delicious, our reaction is happiness. I enjoy that cake. So first of all, there's two things going on with mind. The first part is the initial feeling, and the subsequent part is the reaction, enjoyment. Or listening to opera singing, absolutely boring, unpleasant, it's dislike rather than enjoyment for some people and great pleasure for others. So whether we gain happiness or unhappiness from something depends on our response to that, and therefore depends on mind. Our happiness or unhappiness also are mental states. They're not physical. There's no part of the body or there's no physical thing or physical phenomenon that we can say, this is happiness or this is unhappiness. So happiness depends on mind. On the basis of experiencing things that we like that cause us happiness, then we want more and more of those. So we have perhaps grasping for more and more. So our experience and our response, our mental response, again, depends on mind. Mental response, of course, it depends on mind. I want more and more of that, we have attraction, or I dislike that, we have aversion. So these three factors, how the thing appears to us, whether we are drawn to it or repelled by it, and whether it brings happiness or unhappiness, this pattern we can apply to all of our experiences, positive, negative, or neutral. Up until now, we've thought that happiness or unhappiness depend on circumstances, but if we start to observe our mind, if we analyze, if we consider our way of thinking, we will recognize that happiness or unhappiness are mental responses which also are dependent on mind. You might say, oh, look, it's partially dependent on mind, but it's also largely dependent on something other than mind. So let's take an example. Let's take the example of a hypothetical example of somebody meets an absolutely the perfect prospective partner. This person is ideal for me. This person is so nice, so beautiful. I'm so drawn to this person. I so much enjoy their company. I gain so much happiness from them. If I have more, therefore, I'll have more and more happiness if I spend more and more time with this person. When I'm with them, it's fantastic. When they're away, I miss them and I'm lonely. I want to spend more and more time with them. To the extent that if I can establish a permanent and enduring, prolonged relationship, this will be the foundation of happiness in this life for me. Having the relationship with this perfect person, the one true love, the perfect partner, then I will have happiness. So maybe this is hypothetical. Maybe the relationship progresses to becoming a permanent relationship. Then some months later, or maybe a few years later, then we start to get bored. Or we observe things in the way that this person behaves that we don't like, that annoy us. And then we start to argue with them, we start to find fault with them, we start to think, maybe this relationship isn't a cause of happiness, maybe it's a cause of unhappiness. We look further afield. And then this hypothetical scenario, the relationship becomes not one of attachment, but one of animosity, of hatred, fighting with this person. And then we have arguments with this person, custody of children, about possessions, about the house, the superannuation, the money in the bank, whatever, and we're fighting with this person. And this person becomes our worst enemy, enemy number one. We dislike them so much that if even hearing the name, well, I'll use the Tibetan names, Dorji, makes us unhappy. Now, if we consider ourselves, I'll just go back one step. So this isn't just a hypothetical scenario. At one stage, I was working in the same building as the family law court, and we used to have meetings. We used to go out for coffee in the coffee shop, and we used to overhear, couldn't help but overhear, the absolute worst, vituperative, horrible fights, arguments between people where the relationship had come apart. So the person who started out when we first knew them as the number one person, the best person, the ideal partner, the one true love, has transformed into the worst enemy. If we consider ourselves and we think, how much have I changed in the last 2 or 3 years? Oh, well, I'll probably change a little bit, but by and large, more or less, I'm fundamentally the same person I was 2 or 3 years ago. So I think that is a correct observation. We don't change we don't change 180 degrees in 2 or 3 years. But in terms of in terms of the observed partner, our view of them, this hypothetical view, has shifted 180 degrees from really, really loving them, having tremendous attachment, to changing to having tremendous aversion. So quite clearly, I think from this example, and there's countless other examples which similarly illustrate the point, is the main thing that has changed is our view. So this example I said you may have had the question, well, maybe most of what we experience, it depends on the other thing, and a little bit of it depends on mind. But this example shows that in the case of the shift from great desire and attachment to terrible aversion, that change from seeing the person as being an entirely attractive object, the partner as being an entirely attractive object, to an entirely horrible object, that change, the observed person hasn't changed. What has changed is our way of relating with them, and in particular, our mental view of that person. So the change from 100% positive to 100% negative is a change in our mind, a change of our mind. So in actual fact, our conditions and our circumstances, meeting with pleasant things or meeting with unpleasant things, are triggers. And they can trigger pleasant, happier responses or unhappy responses. And for different people, the same trigger produces or triggers a different response. And what's the difference between what characterizes the different response is different ways of thinking, different minds. So the reason that mind is important is because of physical circumstance and of mind. Mind is the determinant of happiness or unhappiness. It's not the physical condition, not the situation, but it's the mind that determines whether or not we have happiness or unhappiness. Furthermore, if our mind, if we have a very sort of miserable, if our mind is sort of dominated by fear, confusion, anxiety, and misery, then whatever we do, wherever we are, whomever we're meeting with, we have no happiness. On the other hand, if our mind is joyful, relaxed, peaceful, and happy, and tranquil, joyous, then meeting with difficult circumstances, meeting with problems, brings little unhappiness and prospectively even no unhappiness whatsoever, dependent on mind. So one of the cliche catchphrases is resilience. So resilience, people talk about resilience a lot these days. Resilience is having a mind that is not easily upset, can ride with the punches, doesn't easily become upset or miserable. So mind's really important. In fact, mind is preeminently important. This is not just a Buddhist view. There's a line from the Roman emperor and philosopher Marcus Aurelius, who lived in the years 200 AD, and he said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Also, John Milton, the English poet, said, "The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven." So if our mind is confused, distressed, irrational, then all of our experience can become miserable. It doesn't matter how good our conditions are. So back when I was doing year 12, I had a good friend. He was away from school during year 12 for a few months. And they said he had glandular fever. He came from a very good family. He was a very good student, a very good athlete, very popular. Looked like he had everything everything could be achieved in his future. And then later on, at the end of year 12, I was away on holidays, and I heard somebody from the same class came by and said, "Did you hear about this person? He committed suicide. He got bad results during year 12 and he committed suicide." So the purpose of this example is it shows that with a particular way, a manner of thinking, then good conditions are perceived as bad conditions. Things which ought to be a reason for being happy become of no succor, no happiness whatsoever, bring not the slightest relief, and we just experience misery. So if the mind were not able to be trained, if we couldn't change step by step how our mind behaves, then there would be little reason to talk about how things depend on mind, because there's nothing we can do about it. It would be like saying that my happiness depends on the weather. If it's cold, I'm unhappy. If it's warm, I'm happy. We can't do anything about the weather. And it would be silly to have such an attitude that happiness depends on the weather. But with a mind, the mind can be trained. So therefore, at the beginning I was saying that the practice of Buddhist philosophy and psychology, meditation and mindfulness, all are about training the mind. So going back to the analogy of physical exercise, there are different characteristics of our physiology which prevent us from being able to run long distances. We may be overweight, we may be eating the wrong food, we may have very tight muscles, we may have no strength, we may have no cardiovascular endurance. But then if we train ourselves to step by step to reduce and then remove these impediments, then we can run more and more and more. So we identify the physical concerns which prevent us from being able to run distances, and we practice in a way to remove them. So it's like that with training the mind. We identify the negative mental states that are the causes of unhappiness, and we train the mind step by step to reduce them and perhaps even ultimately eliminate them. We identify the positive mental states, which are a cause of happiness, and then step by step we cultivate those positive mental states so that they arise more frequently, they last longer, and even that they become stronger and produce greater and greater happiness. So it's important not just to train the mind to have happiness, it's also important for our relationships with others. If we're relaxed and happy, then people enjoy relating with us. On the other hand, if we're stressful, neurotic, unhappy, angry, easily upset, then people don't enjoy so much relating with us. So by having a peaceful, relaxed, patient, generous outlook, then we bring happiness. Not only do we bring happiness to ourselves, we bring happiness to those around us, those we encounter, and particularly those with whom we spend much of our lives. Also, pretty much everybody wants to have a long, healthy life. So good health and a long life, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, if you spoke to a medical scientist, they would say good health and long life are dependent on nature and nurture. What sort of genes we were born with, and then how we look after our body. And only dependent on those things. And how we look after our body means what we eat, how much we sleep, how much we exercise, how hard we work, and so forth. But the Buddha did disagree, not disagree completely, but said it's not sufficient just to look after the body. So 2,600 years ago, the Buddha taught that good health is also dependent on mind. Way back in the late 70s, early 80s, my teacher, Geshe, said that being healthy depends on having a peaceful and relaxed mind. And way back then, those were that was the time, the end of the age of the Aquarius, the end of the hippie time. My background is in science. I'd say, as it's in science, I said, oh yeah, maybe I'll take that on notice. But these days, there's more and more medical evidence that shows that negative states of mind damage our health. More and more scientific evidence. So being stressed for a short time, the fight or flight response is a survival trait. Being continuously stressed, anxious, is not a survival trait. It changes our physiology, it changes our biochemistry, and then step by step, it damages our physiology. They did. There's been a number of detailed scientific research projects observing the brains of meditators versus an ordinary person's brain. And a meditator's brain is in some ways quite different. And they've also observed a meditator's physiology. And a meditator's telomeres is one of the words they use. Somebody who's practiced meditation consistently and seriously. In this case, they use as their subject somebody who's done 10,000 hours of meditation in his life. In one study, their physiology also was quite different. So having a happy, relaxed mind promotes good health. It doesn't guarantee good health, but the converse of having a mind that is continuously stressed and anxious, that will definitely damage the health. There was a study done of people recovering from heart surgery, and that research showed that the person who is by nature optimistic recovered far more quickly from heart surgery than the person whose by nature is pessimistic. So an optimist is somebody who's more likely to think that there's prospect of a good outcome. A pessimist is someone who's more likely to think things are going to go badly. So having negative traits, mental traits, where they're strong, frequent, and persistent, damage our health. Having mental traits that are frequent, enduring, and powerful improves our physical health. The mind is not the necessary and only condition for good health. That would be a silly thing to say. But having good health is really dependent on having, in the long term, is really dependent on having a balanced, happy mind. So as I said, the mind is changeable. It's not something which is fixed. And this is obvious from day to day, hour to hour. Our mind is up and down, week to week, year to year even. So we can see that the mind is impermanent. Practicing breathing meditation as we did at the beginning of this session, the impermanence of mind was there before us. We could see the mind not resting, but moving. So if the mind were by its nature fixed, permanent, then of course you can't change it. So by way of a physical example, the nature of gold is that it will always be gold. There is no chemical process whereby gold can be changed into something other than gold. But the nature of mind is not fixed, so it obviously changes, and furthermore, it can be changed. So mind is subject to the non-deceptive relationship between cause and effect. So our way of relating with the world, both at a personal level and at a scientific level, is we believe that that there is an explanation for why things happen. So if a person gets sick, we think, well, why did she or he get sick? There must be an explanation of why they got sick. If a person is successful in business, right, we say, we ask ourselves, what's the reason? Why were they successful with their business? Or conversely, why were they unsuccessful with the business? As the climate becomes warmer, as there is global warming, climate change, we expect that there is a relationship. This climate change, it goes counter to all of our experience and counter to our way of thinking, to think that, for example, climate change is just random. There must be an explanation. So this way of understanding things that happen are dependent on something or another is, in generally speaking, a consideration of cause and effect. So in the case of mind, the experience of happiness is an effect, and similarly, the experience of unhappiness, both are effects. And because they are effects, they necessarily have causes. So the statement that mind is subject to the non-deceptive relationship between cause and effect is that what happens to mind depends on causes, and the non-deceptive part is particular causes necessarily produce a particular type of result. So in the same way that a barley grain can only ever produce barley, and the seed of a weed can only ever produce a weed. Similarly, causes of a particular state of mind, positive causes necessarily produce positive results in terms of positive feeling, positive experience, and happiness. Negative causes necessarily will produce negative results. So therefore, training the mind means to train ourselves to stop creating causes of unhappiness, and to training ourselves to create more and more causes for happiness. So how do we train the mind? The two principal ways of training the mind are the main ways of training the mind are through mental trainings, not through physical trainings, and in particular through meditation and mindfulness. So the definition of meditation is thorough familiarization with a positive object. So when we meditate, in our normal manner of thinking is that Our mind jumps from thing to thing, from thought to thought to thought. It's like going into a darkened room or a darkened art gallery and shining a torch is shining on this painting. We observe it to this painting. We observe that. Then we move it to this painting. We observe that, and so forth. And none of the paintings do we actually we see properly because the torch is moving. So like that with mind, as you probably will have recognized through trying to practice meditation where we observe just a single object, the breath, the mind doesn't stay still, it jumps around. So the first characteristic of thorough familiarization is that the mind remains steadily on the single object. If we're looking at continue the example, and that the example is just shining the torch on a single painting in the room. So the torch isn't moving. If the torch is very dull, although the object appears that we see the painting, it doesn't appear clearly. So the second aspect of thorough familiarization is to have a very clear, strong, and focused mind, to see vividly and clearly the object. And the third characteristic of meditation is that it needs to be an object which, by virtue of becoming familiar with it, that object, then that is a cause of experiencing happiness. So the breath is a positive or virtuous object because it relaxes us. By observing the breath, we induce relaxation. There are lots and lots of different examples of virtuous objects. The Buddha said there are 84,000 different virtuous objects. Other examples are, for example, developing compassion, wishing for others to be free of unhappiness and suffering, or love. So the reason that meditation is an effective method of training the mind is because our engagement with the virtuous object when we're meditating is much, much stronger than normal. If our meditation is very, very good, it's immeasurably stronger than the way that we normally engage with things. We're holding the object vividly without distraction for a long period of time. So if we hold the object for a second, that creates a mental imprint can be measured, that is dependent on that 1 second. If we engage with the object for 10 seconds, the mental imprint without distraction, the mental imprint is 10 times as strong. If we engage in the object for 1 minute, the mental imprint is 60 times as strong. So if we can engage through meditation with the object for 5, 10, 15, 20, 60 minutes, several hours, then the imprint or the training of the mind, and therefore what result that training will bring is comparably stronger. The second way of training the mind is through mindfulness. So generally speaking, if we consider carefully, we will see that anger makes us unhappy. Being impatient and being easily upset, by their very definition, are causes of unhappiness. So we think, okay, I'm a very impatient person. I easily get upset. I want to change. We train ourselves through mindfulness to train the mind in patience. So step by step, we become less inclined to being upset. The way that mindfulness works is that one part of the mind is always aware of and is monitoring what is happening, our thoughts, our way of thinking. And then that part of the mind, that observer, when we become upset, that observer says, Michael, you've become annoyed by something which is ridiculous. I know, maybe the football umpire giving a bad call. Why be upset or unhappy at that? It's stupid. Do not be upset or unhappy at that. And then the observer, that is like an intercession. It says, take your mind, do not be upset or angry. So by doing that, rather than dwelling on this perceived negative thing, we turn our mind away from that. So rather than becoming upset by this thing, we don't become upset and we're patient. If we have no mindfulness, then maybe something little annoys us. We then dwell on how annoying that is. Then we become angry. And if it's something that somebody was doing, maybe they were coughing loudly, we'll say, they shouldn't cough so loudly. And then we can end up having a furious argument over something which is completely inconsequential. So the way mindfulness is like, in the case of anger, is like catching a bushfire when it's just a spark or a small flame and putting it out before it spreads. So mindfulness is a skill that we cultivate over time. It's not something that we have 100% with us from the beginning. We improve our mindfulness through continuously training in it during the day. And also we improve our facility for having mindfulness, the practice of meditation, because with meditation, what we're doing is we're watching the mind, we're recognizing when the mind moves in a direction that we don't want it to move, and then we're bringing it back to the place where we wanted it to remain. So mindfulness and meditation both support each other. Through training the mind in mindfulness and meditation, through training properly, over time, any negative mental state can be reduced. And if we're able to practice meditation, and not everybody has even the physical basis to be able to practice meditation, then it's actually possible to completely eliminate negative mental traits. If we completely eliminate negative mental traits, which is kind of like becoming the equivalent of an Olympic athlete meditator, then we completely eliminate all unhappiness in such a way that it will never ever return. So a little bit over time. My apologies for that. Do you have any questions? Time for question and answer. Has anybody started their own at-home meditation practice, and how is it going? Are you finding it difficult? Are you finding it easy? Do you find it hard to be consistent? Do you find sitting still for 10, 15 minutes challenging? Are you finding it helpful? So a question, I have trouble quietening the mind. Any other tips? So whilst generally speaking, meditation will quieten the mind, and if we practice meditation properly, over time the mind will definitely become quieter. For some people, meditation, it's trying to sit to meditate. It just means the mind becomes busier and busier and busier. It doesn't become quieter. Meditation is not the only way of quietening the mind. It's other activities also are really good for quietening the mind, such as, for some people, exercise, physical exercise, running or swimming or practicing yoga or practicing a sport like tennis, as long as we don't become upset or angry. These things quieten the mind, because the reason that activities like running or swimming quietens the mind is when we're running or swimming, it's quite physically hard. Our awareness is drawn almost completely into the physical activity. And what we find, and by this very reason, we're not following our usual mental agitation. So many thoughts slow down because we're working hard physically. We don't have the mental space to have agitation. So exercise can quieten the mind. When we do yoga, or when we do Tai Chi or Qigong, other physical activities, then we're focusing on our physical posture, our physical movements. By virtue of focusing on our physical posture, our physical movements, our mind is drawn away from those things which not generally agitate it. So we'll find at the end of the yoga session, my mind is feeling so much quieter. So physical activities, and it depends for different people. Listening to appropriate music can be helpful for some people. These activities, these physical activities, will quieten the mind somewhat, but it's not possible to gain a deep mental quietude or stability just by virtue of physical activity alone. Deep relaxation and quietude is dependent on meditation. Also, our mindfulness during the day helps with our meditation session. If we're mindful during the day, then when we come home, the whole day we've been fairly relaxed and steady. When we sit down to meditate, instead of dwelling on all the bad things that happen during the day, we easily settle into the meditation session. Meditation helps with mindfulness. We sit and meditate, the mind becomes quieter and quieter. We have a sense of tranquility and stability. That sense of tranquility and stability carries on during the day, and we become more aware of what's happening with mind. Avoiding some physical activities help with meditation. So, for example, when I'm doing a meditation retreat, I have to cut down my coffee. So at the beginning of the retreat, the coffee's okay, but as my mind quietens, if I have a coffee, a strong coffee, then my next meditation session will be useless. On the other hand, if I'm really, really tired and have a coffee, then the coffee is a bit of help. But coffee agitates the mind. Engaging in certain activities agitate the mind. So getting involved with emotional disputes with other people agitate our mind and then make it hard to cultivate a quiet mind. Some activities, listening to some types of music, can also, rather than quietening the mind, can agitate the mind. watching certain movies which stimulate anger or attachment. These agitate the mind, therefore are not helpful. Are there any more questions? Are there any books that I can recommend for beginners? In terms of understanding the Buddhist principles of practice, then I can recommend Essence of the Path to Enlightenment by my teacher, Geshe Loden, that we sell through the temple. In terms of really good introductory books, books by His Highness the Dalai Lama also are really good. I wish it's a while since I've read or recommended them, so I'll just do a quick. I'll just look up the title, the one that comes to mind. Oh, Google's such a good thing. The Art of Happiness by His Highness the Dalai Lama. That's the one. I remembered it without even doing the lookup. And pretty much any of the Dalai Lama's books are fantastic. So they're pretty much any of the introductory books. He teaches also really sort of detailed and advanced subjects, but any of his introductory I can strongly recommend. So thank you very much. Great to meet with you again. And I look forward to next week's session. Thank you.